Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining our WatchGuard and Datto webinar today. Your MSP business status, are you always available? My name is Christine Ramsdell, Marketing Specialist here at WatchGuard. I'm also joined by the two presenters here, Himanshu Verma, Director of Business Development for WatchGuard, and Chris Tate, Director of Business Development for Datto. And before we begin, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. The first is that the audio is streamed through your computer only, so there is no dial-in. Second, all the widgets on your menu are resizable and movable. Third, there is a Q&A box, and all questions will be answered at the end, but at any time, please feel free to enter in your questions into the box. There is an on-demand recording of this, which is available as the same live link. And lastly, we do offer CPE credit for all our webinars. This webinar is going to be an hour, so it equals to 1 credit. Please check in with your certification body for more details. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Himanshu to talk about a little bit about himself, and then Chris. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Christine. Hello, everyone. This is Himanshu Verma from WatchGuard. I'm Director of Business Development, and looking forward to have a great conversation today and present some views on how we can take a layered security approach in providing not only effective security services, but also leveraging some of those security solutions internally for the MSPs themselves as well.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for that introduction. My name is Chris Tate, and I'm Business Development Director in EMEA for Datto. So for me, it's coming towards the end of my working day, so I apologize if you're just beginning yours. I've got 1 hour left to go, which is good. As you probably know, Datto are probably best known for sort of business continuity and disaster recovery. So I'm interested in learning more about the sort of layered approach to security, and then we can maybe talk a little bit about what Datto can do to help as part of that security stack.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. Just a quick agenda on how we're going to flow this presentation today for our partners. Number one is just to emphasize the importance of layered approach to cybersecurity. This is all tied to how the threat landscape is changing, what are some of the trends that we are seeing in the market, and how partners can effectively use that to actually provide services to their customers. The second one is how to enable end-to-end availability. So as Chris mentioned, WatchGuard's joined here with Datto, who are well known for their availability solutions. So Chris is going to emphasize that in when disaster strikes or when the threat landscape sees some of these compromises, how to actually work through and do end-to-end availability. And the final is how business continuity solutions can help you. So the combination of both security solutions as well as business continuity is what will bring the end-to-end availability for the resources and services. So we're going to emphasize on that as well. Christine, before I move forward, I just want to make sure that on the live view, the slides are coming in fine.
Yep, we are good to go.
Perfect. So I just want to emphasize the market dynamics of managed security services. This is a market that continues to grow. We are seeing some double-digit growth here. Depending upon markets and markets information, as well as Frost & Sullivan, the managed services market is expected to grow to about $35 billion by 2020. And this is a market that is highly influenced by the small, medium businesses. What we are seeing is that more and more buying decisions and the criteria to actually implement IT resources and IT infrastructure is now driven by managed service providers. Small, medium businesses are the ones who are typically driving a big part of this market. Since that's where the customers do not have the proper know-how or the IT skill set to deal with the current threat landscape, as well as they are strived on resources and budget constraints, they're actually looking to their partners, which is most of you guys, and managed service providers to provide effective services that can actually take care of the full end-to-end security as well as availability within that infrastructure. So this market will continue to grow, and this is where there's an opportunity for everyone in this market. Also, as the threat landscape evolves, what we are seeing is that the employees are a major attack vector. This has been changing considerably over the last couple of years. Most of the attack vectors are now targeted to focus on the user or the employee of the organization. Whether it's your customer's employees, whether it's your employees, the attack vectors are now targeted to find a loophole and then go ahead and infiltrate the ecosystem of IT infrastructure. Also, what's notable here is that usually it's perceived that most of these attacks start with some rogue guy, sitting there and doing a lot of sophisticated stuff and trying to penetrate into a network or trying to penetrate into an IT infrastructure. But what we are finding is that 99% of these email-based financial fraud relied on human clicks, which means that the bad guys are basically luring the users into clicking on a certain link and then going ahead and transferring the payload or transferring the malware and the ransomware through that click. So their job's actually to just lure the user in clicking on these certain links, rather than working on some sophisticated IT attack, which requires in taking down the full IT infrastructure. Most of the cases, once the user clicks on these links, that's where the attack vector starts, and they start to proliferate within that IT infrastructure. Additionally, what we are seeing is that 90% of the malicious URL messages led to credential phishing pages. This is where you receive an email that is asking for a change to your banking account's password, or you receive an email that is luring you to update an address or an information, but then that it's actually redirecting to a staged infrastructure where you're trying to enter in passwords and credentials that are then stolen and farmed. So once the attack vector or the attacker has those credentials, they can now go ahead and actually do some more advanced threats. So those are some of the trends here, and it seems that the users are the ones, or the employees are the ones that are mostly targeted, and that's how these attacks are initiated. Some of the other market trends that we want to highlight here are that 70% of employees work remotely 1 day a week. This is a statistic that is widely available as more and more IT organizations and customers are promoting efficiency. They are actually now enabling their employees to work remotely. This is a CNBC stat that was published, and globally we are seeing that 70% of employees work remotely at least 1 day a week. In some of the other organizations or customers, that number is higher, and the frequency is higher as well. Because of this, what's happening is that these users and these workers need an infrastructure which is more agile and is available throughout the day or throughout their work life cycle. And the reliance on cloud applications, the reliance on SaaS applications, and the use of that infrastructure is now leading less and less of network traffic staying within the network perimeter. So what we are seeing is that by 2021, 27% of network traffic for the average company will bypass the network perimeter entirely. So it's no longer this walled infrastructure behind the gateway, which is where the employees are residing. Since they are always remote, they're traveling, or they're working from home and remotely, we are seeing that they will be, more and more of this traffic will not be relying on the network perimeter, but it will bypass it or interface with it in certain other ways. So this is again, leading to some of the different trends around how the threat vectors and the attack vectors are perceived. So jumping into that, what we are seeing is that the attacks are now changing, and what these attacks look like now are more tied to, again, end user focused, where it starts with a phishing or a spear phishing attack, Phishing attacks are generally where the user receives a URL or an email with a URL embedded in it, luring them to click on it. Spear phishing attacks where the attacker has done some background work to actually gather information and gather knowledge of the user from either social media or other means, and then targeting that attack to a known user with some information. We're also seeing social media spoofing and watering hole attacks. And then tied to social media is fake social identities. And this is all leading to, as I mentioned earlier, the credential theft, which is, whether it's your username and password or your traditional 2FA solutions where, somebody is receiving an SMS out of band or a phone call, which can now be very easily spoofed by man-in-the-middle attacks. So these are all leading to the one thing where the users are becoming the weak link, and that's tied to the threat landscape that we are seeing. I'll pass it on to Chris to emphasize some of these trends and what they are seeing in the market with regards to business continuity as well.
Great. Thank you very much, Himanshu. That's really interesting. And as someone personally who is a remote worker, it's got me thinking a little bit about what I do with where my traffic's handled and how I work. It's really it's a very, very topical subject. And I think it's the same worldwide. I think in the UK, those sorts of stats about most workers working from home 1 or 2 days a week is beginning to increase, and it's a trend which is only going to continue. And what this means is that the humans are an attack vector, and then what's happening is more and more infections or malware is getting onto systems and it's causing downtime. And I wanted to quickly touch here on what is at stake in terms of downtime being a reality and there's a real cost associated with it. Now, this is in great British pounds, unfortunately, rather than US dollars, but with the current exchange rate, they're almost interchangeable, so it's not a problem. So basically, effectively, the amount of cost for downtime kind of varies depending on the size of the business. I'll just bring them all up there. And you'll see that it kind of increases, but the average for a business in the UK is over £7,000 per hour of downtime. And that is kind of an incredible figure for a small to medium business to handle. It shows that it is real and downtime is real. And this is why, from Datto's point of view, we work with partners like WatchGuard to help prevent the infections and prevent the downtime. But Datto is sort of is there as the backstop for instance, it does happen to help you get back up and running again quickly. So we totally get that the threat is growing, and it's really interesting that it's sort of mainly human based now, which is different. And we can see this by looking at the kind of different factors invented, sort of what causes the disaster. And, natural disaster, which is kind of, I guess, what everyone thinks of when they think of downtime, so that would be a flood or a fire or something, is actually a relatively small proportion of the whole thing. So there are lots of other things that cause downtime, such as human error, which is probably the single largest thing, and then malware as well. So we're seeing all kinds of things contributing. So when putting together a solution to help sort of protect your clients' networks, and then also having a solution to help recover, it's really interesting to try and think of all of the different types of disaster that could happen. It's not only going to be someone stealing a server or something like that. There's a whole bunch of different areas. So just quickly look at some of the things that we've seen in terms of the threat landscape and about what it is, what we've seen happening, which is actually very similar to the data that Himanshu showed there. One of which is ransomware is still a big thing. It's evolving, but it's growing. It's becoming more targeted. I think that's the difference. And the way that it's being deployed is more targeted rather than the sort of throw it out there and try and fire it at a million servers and see what sticks. I think that is being replaced now with more social engineering and more targeted attacks. As we see with phishing, machine learning is making the phishing attacks much, much harder to spot. So we're seeing that this is users becoming an attack vector. It's becoming almost more difficult for users to determine what is a real and what is a fake email and things. So this is kind of becoming much harder, which explains why I think that the human factor is becoming more prevalent. Credential stuffing. This is one that I'm kind of very passionate about speaking. It's credential stuffing is a big area where people reuse passwords for different applications. One application gets compromised, and then effectively those username and password combinations are thrown at almost every other application on the web, and then packaged up and sold on the dark web. So I think that credential stuffing and not using correct password management is something that's really, really damaging and really, really kind of a big area on the threat landscape. Banking Trojans, we're seeing these on the rise again, a little bit more sophisticated, more targeted, but we are seeing more of them into 2019. Internet of Things attacks, we are definitely seeing this, probably more around this sort of distributed denial of service attacks. But when purchasing Internet of Things devices, it's really important to understand what the security risks are on this. And this is where shadow IT, I guess, comes in to a certain extent. You've probably got customers that kind of, I think one day they'll bring an Alexa in or an internet-enabled coffee maker or something like that. Think nothing of it, think nothing of connecting it to the corporate network, but no one is really thinking about how secure that is. So I think from an MSP point of view or a service provider point of view, I think it's really important to make sure that you've got sort of separated, isolated networks for Internet of Things devices, unless you're sort of really confident about the security. And crypto mining continues to be a nuisance. I don't think it's a major, threat in terms of downtime or anything, but I think it's more of a threat in terms of sort of wasting resource and compute power. You probably all get calls from end users saying their computer's running slow or something, and then you investigate and there's some kind of crypto mining software on there. So we're seeing this as part of the threat landscape, although it's not particularly damaging. So this is sort of where we see the threat landscape in 2019. And with that, I'll hand back to Himanshu.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Very helpful information indeed. And I want to tie that into, what a layered defense approach looks like. And I think we take this stance by telling our partners and sharing what a cyber kill chain looks like. This is a model that has been widely, talked about by Lockheed Martin, which was a cyber kill chain 2.0. And Corey Neckreiner, if you guys are familiar with our CTO office, Corey's our head of the CTO office, and he, provides a lot of informative information every day at secplicity.org or the WatchGuard threat landscape. This is his rendition 3.0 version, and I'll share with you guys what he's actually changed here. But if you look at how to actually take a layered approach to any attack vectors and protect your customers and clients against these attack vectors, it's always good to understand what an attack actually looks like. So we've broken that down into the different phases and stages. It all starts with reconnaissance, where the bad guys are trying to gather information on who they want to target and what they want to target. This could be, relying on information that is publicly available, or taking steps and measures to gather that information within the organization around your customers' businesses or their infrastructure. Then comes delivery, how they're going to deliver this, attack vector. As I mentioned, we are seeing a lot of that going into users lured into clicking on malicious links or clicking on links that effectively deliver a payload which, infiltrates or bypasses the network perimeter or bypasses, any gateways that might be in place. So I think that's becoming more and more relevant. But the second stage is the delivery stage of how that attack is getting delivered. Then the compromise or the exploit, which is what is at risk, whether it's data, whether it's endpoint, whether it's IT resources, whether it's username and passwords or credentials. So what is getting compromised or exploited? The vulnerabilities from the reconnaissance stage are exploited to launch an attack. Then comes in the infection or the installation. That payload gets installed or executed. So in the case if it's a malware or it's a ransomware, you'll see that getting executed. We've seen that now very commonly in the form of fileless malware, which is becoming more and more relevant. Commonly using authorized processes that reside natively on operating systems, so that traditional antiviruses and traditional security solutions are not able to detect any of that anomaly, and you require like advanced AI and machine learning or behavioral based solutions to detect some of that. Then comes command and control, where because the size of the malware or the ransomware usually is big, what the bad guys or the threat actors do is not send that complete payload right away, but create a command and control connection where now that process runs to download and bring in the full payload or the full ransomware and malware files. And this is where we've actually modified some of that, where it's not only just creating the command and control and then finally leading to what actually is the end goal, but lateral movement and pivoting is becoming more and more important, where the attacker moves behind the network perimeter to the final target. So whether it's farming additional credentials within the organization or farming more private and critical information. And then the final stage is the objectives and the exfiltration. As Chris highlighted earlier, ransomware is still a big problem. If you look at all the state government and local government bodies in U.S., I can't think of any single state government body that didn't get affected with ransomware. So again, the objective here is to actually lead to some sort of the goal of the attack, which is accomplished. So this is, how we break down an attack, and then you got to take into consideration how to address each one of these stages and take a layered approach across that. Also, as I mentioned, since the workforce behavior is changing for your customers and clients, and the security challenges follow your workforce. And what's needed today in the market is, obviously, as I mentioned, malware protection is must, but it's not only required for users who are behind a corporate enterprise or, when they come to their work premises, but also something that travels with the users. The reliance on traditional security services is no longer enough. So what you need is the next generation protection against some of these emerging threats, whether in the form of leveraging security solutions that incorporate artificial intelligence, machine learning, as well as behavioral and heuristical entities, and build some intelligence around that or correlate that information. So I think that's something which is very important. Zero-day and advanced persistent threats, these are something that have now led to our ransomware and advanced malware threats becoming more and more popular. But again, what I wanted to highlight here is that they're not only required on the gateway or within the network where the users reside, but because they are remote and they are constantly traveling, this is something, again, that's required to travel with the users, and hence the ability to detect these advanced threats everywhere. Ransomware protection, this is becoming, a ubiquitous security service. Again, very critical in any layered security approach to have ransomware protection, whether on the network or on the endpoint or to follow the user wherever they are. Identity protection. So user credentials, as I mentioned earlier, are a key issue. As Chris highlighted, credential farming is one of the key threats. So multi-factor authentication is very critical. There's multiple trends in the industry around passwordless authentication or zero trust authentication, and they all tie into the emphasis of less reliance on username and passwords. There are a ton of tools out there that can tell you and educate you as well as your customers that their username and passwords have been compromised. I always assume every day that my username and password is compromised in some fashion because I don't rely on that anymore. So multi-factor authentication is a must and should be present whether you're accessing local resources or you're accessing cloud applications. And finally, data must be centrally correlated and used to protect across the organization. And this is where, whether it's you're using, business continuity solutions or you're using, security services, you need to ensure that there is some level of threat intelligence or there is some level of correlation that is going on, because the end result of that will be automated security services or automation that will allow you to actually, spend less time or less human time or human power in correlating information and getting the end result of how to prevent, detect, and respond to these attacks more effectively. So those are some of the key challenges that need to be addressed when you're looking at a true layered security approach.
Awesome. That was, again, that's really interesting, actually. Several things I've made a note of there that I need to go and look at on my own network and speak to the team about. And I speak to lots of MSPs all around the world, and I think that's sort of really, really good, succinct list of tips, which is really good. So I think with Datto and business continuity, I think this is kind of back to basics. I imagine it's sort of, you all understand this, but just a little bit of a recap. Is backup minimizes data loss. Backup's been around for as long as I can remember. Magnetic tape sort of came along in the 1950s. We were working with magnetic tape still in the 80s and 90s, and basically people could protect their data. So if something did happen, if there's a kind of an attack or a hardware failure or a disaster, then the kind of backup would allow them to get the data back. That's kind of a given. End users understand they have to back up. It's something that's sort of been drilled into them for years and years. The difference is that continuity minimizes the downtime element. They'll still get the data back, but they won't have the downtime of having to go and rebuild the server and start again almost. So I think when we're speaking to end users, sometimes it's important to kind of explain the difference between backup, which minimizes loss, and and continuity, which minimizes downtime. We see that as a sort of a key differentiator between the two solutions. And when speaking to your customers, get them thinking certain things. So maybe run through a checklist of different things that they should be thinking about, which is basically things like how much data can the business afford to lose? Some businesses may say, well, certain amounts of data, old archive data or some photos we've got on there or iTunes data, for example, we're not overly concerned about, but at least they've given it some thought. Secondly, how much downtime can the business tolerate? This can vary on an application by application basis, but it can also be quite keen based on sort of how much downtime. Can they afford to be down for an hour, 2 hours? Some businesses can't afford to be down for sort of more than sort of 5 or 10 minutes. So when speaking to your customers, ask them to give this some thought about that. Also ask them how often should the critical data be backed up. Back to the days of tape, it was probably done on average once a day. Someone would put a tape in overnight, do a backup, and then that would be it. And then there wouldn't be another backup taken until the following day. People now probably expect critical data to be backed up more often than that. And the next thing, which goes back to tape again, we used to take the tapes home, or someone in the office used to take the tapes home every day. The modern equivalent of that is how regularly should that data be sent off-site? It's okay running a backup internally from one server to another if they're both in the same building. It kind of defeats the object. So sooner or later, you've got to take those backups, whether they're physical, as in a tape or a USB or a hard drive or something, or move it to the cloud and get that data away from the office. So how regularly would the client want that to happen? When a backup's tested, how often are they tested? How long does it test? How quickly can a disaster sort of be recovered from if something goes wrong? So again, this is something that when you're speaking to customers, ask them if they've ever prepared for a test and what you can do to help them recover from a disaster and how long it would take. And how often they do full-scale DR testing. Sometimes a partner might say, well, can you restore a file for me? Or they'll ask for an odd file or folder restore, and you can do it, and it works absolutely fine. But it's sometimes a completely different scenario to say, how quickly could I get the whole system back or all of the systems back in the event of a disaster? So when speaking to partners, have this kind of idea in mind. There are checklists. I think Datto have got a checklist with a whole bunch you can find on the internet to let you to go when you're speaking to your end user customers and just run through this. And just a lot of the exercise, like a lot of the things that we do as managed service providers when educating our clients, is just getting them thinking about it. A lot of them won't think that the data's at risk. A lot of them won't think of the day that the data is no longer there. So it's really important to make them think about it. And when looking at a DR solution, we would recommend that there's sort of 3 approach. This is the rule of 3s that we use at Datto. Basically, it's really simple. 3 copies of the data over 2 different mediums and 1 copy off-site. It couldn't be simpler, really. That's something that's a mantra that we use. And to very, very quickly go through the way that Datto hybrid cloud works, and I don't want to make this a sales pitch, but I just want to explain a little bit about how this works for Datto and similar solutions. There are obviously other competitors that do this as well, but this is the way that we would approach the rule of threes. You've got your production environment at your customer. This can be their physical or virtual servers. This is them running day to day. In a normal scenario, this is how they operate. We've also got an on-premise backup and disaster recovery server. This would be a Datto appliance taking snapshots of your customer data up to every 5 minutes. So the days of waiting 24 hours have all gone. If something happens to the production environment, you're very, very quickly able to virtualize the client onto the on-premise backup and DR. So that's kind of a traditional backup disaster recovery solution. But then the problem is if there's a disaster in the building, so if there's a fire, then obviously both of those scenarios, both of those production environment and the backup device have been lost. So this is where the kind of Datto Cloud comes in, which offers the off-site backup and disaster recovery. So if something happens to the production environment, which also takes down the DR server, then we're also able to virtualize the whole environment directly in the cloud. I'll just hand back over to Himanshu.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So I think you can see like how business continuity and backup and recovery is a key component here. But I think going back to my original premise of layered security approach, one of the things that we're also seeing is that where partners can add value for their clients and customers and for themselves within their own infrastructure is to take an approach of adaptive security. This is Gartner's adaptive security architecture, which was introduced a couple of years ago, where the emphasis is not only preventing and detecting threats. So I think what Chris highlighted is that you can take responsive approaches of taking backups and restoring the data that's been lost, and that's one way to approach this. But if you take an adaptive security approach, what you're doing is now you're building layers of putting in security services as well as some of the business continuity solutions in place to actually start by preventing threats that are coming in or preventing threats from getting to the users. Then most importantly, proactively or reactively detecting those threats by leveraging some of the advanced security services, not just your traditional security services, but also some of these advanced technologies that can detect these threats before they actually either get to the users or to the entities of the IT infrastructure. And then building a response mechanism which either leverages an automated response or leverages solutions that can ensure 100% continuity of business and zero downtime. And then one of the things that I highlighted earlier was how threat intelligence or implementing solutions that work together in an ecosystem and then have the ability to predict and provide intelligence into what could be foreseen in the future are becoming more and more relevant. So I think this is where it's important that when you're making the decisions of packaging some of these solutions together as part of providing a true managed security service to your customers, to take an approach of selecting solutions that have some of these capabilities and can provide a full prevention, detection, response, as well as intelligence capabilities. This is one of the reasons why WatchGuard's been so focused and emphasis on providing correlation around some of our own security services is so that the element of threat intelligence and correlation becomes important. Whether it's our antivirus solutions incorporating machine learning and artificial intelligence, and then working together hand in hand with zero-day threat protection, which is APT blocker, or whether it's threat detection and response, which is our security services extending that security to the endpoint and preventing and detecting threats that are coming to these users and their infrastructure, and then also being able to automatically respond to that. That allows partners to effectively provide that service. and then ensuring that these services can talk to each other and provide that threat intelligence that can then be leveraged by other solutions as well. So this is, one of the key areas to take into consideration as well. Eventually, what this does is affects the total cost of ownership of the services that you are delivering to your clients, or the total cost of ownership of your own managed service practice, because you are now not relying on humans or threat analysts who are sitting there and actively monitoring this stuff, but you're relying on technologies like machine learning and artificial intelligence, or collective threat intelligence that can feed some of this information automatically back into the security services. So how WatchGuard can help? Obviously, number one, as I mentioned, we have a simple and affordable MFA service for everyone. Multi-factor authentication is very key and important. Every process, every application requires user credentials, so those user credentials need to be protected. So using our multi-factor authentication service, partners can actually protect access to these applications and access to resources, whether they are local or in the cloud. Next is on and off network protection and associated education. As you know, WatchGuard's introduced several new security services over the last 12 or 14 months, and one of those security services is DNS-based protection, both on the network as well as currently what's in beta is off-network protection. So I think that's something which is very critical and allows users to not be exposed as a threat vector right away to some of these sophisticated attacks. And then most importantly, detection, response, and visibility everywhere, whether it's on the endpoint, whether it's on the network, whether it's the resources that are being accessed. Again, this is where the true layered security approach comes in, and the total security suite that WatchGuard offers helps partners to actually implement that layered security approach, along with partners and technologies like Datto's, which I'll let Chris highlight here.
Thanks for that. So yeah, again, much like you did there, I'll just do a very quick summary. One of which is, when speaking to clients, understand when to use business continuity and how to describe it above and beyond backup. Make sure that wherever you've got customer data, wherever that may be, whether that be SaaS-based or on-premise, make sure that you're storing or they're storing 3 copies of that data, and you're able to manage that for them. Test and retest their backups. I think that this is something that as an MSP you can potentially charge for this service, especially around the regular DR checks. You could offer it as part of your monthly fee, or you could offer an additional service to give your customers the additional peace of mind around that. Automate regular tasks. One of the things that MSPs are very much based on is sort of how long it takes to do things, because the amount of time running tasks is where the profitability is. So try and automate where you can regarding your disaster recovery testing. Choose an integrated platform, which is obviously a plug for the Datto platform there, because that's how we operate. And know your costs, especially during a disaster. One of the things that we're quite keen on at Datto is the costs are fixed. So if whether or not you use the disaster service or you don't, the prices aren't going to go up if you're running in a DR environment. What some vendors in the space have done historically, not so much anymore, is that it's all okay until you get a disaster, and then you're finding that you're having to charge your customer a lot more money for the service. So just try and choose a vendor, whoever it is, that's kind of upfront for the costs that are applicable. And that's the summary from Datto. So I think we may have some questions.
Yes, thank you both. We are answering questions right now, so go ahead and type it into the box. Okay, so the very first question, Himanshu, I have a question here, is can you discuss the collaboration between WatchGuard and Datto, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So number one, Datto is a suite of services that are offered today. Datto has solutions that offer backup and recovery. Prominently, Datto also has solutions that offers RMM and PSA capabilities in lieu of their inclusion with Autotask. And then finally, Datto has network services that are available in the form of Wi-Fi solutions and also some of the IT infrastructure related to switching, et cetera. So if you look at what we presented here from a layered security approach, number one, you want to make sure that the data that is getting backed up and getting restored is fully protected and insured. I think the last thing you want to do is back up ransomware and malware or restore ransomware or malware. So I think using WatchGuard's total security suite allows those feature capabilities to come into play. The second one, where we really closely integrate with Datto's Autotask solution, is by having a unique API-based integration that allows partners to manage, asset information and have full synchronization of their IT infrastructure or the WatchGuard, IT infrastructure as well, included in Autotask. And then most importantly, we also have a closed-loop service desk ticketing integrated with Autotask that allows for partners to be fully aware of any service desk tickets that are initiated due to the security services in WatchGuard solutions, and then go ahead and automatically respond or close to them as well. So these are all listed and available on WatchGuard's integration website as part of our partner integration. And then most importantly, taking into consideration networking plus security, I think that's another key area. As you are very familiar, WatchGuard has some differentiated network security services in the form of our total security suite, as well as we can add security into an existing Wi-Fi install by using our TWE, which is Trusted Wireless Environment, using our own access points as WIP sensors in third-party installs. So I think that whole sort of like combined solution is where you can implement that layered security approach and provide that effective service and position that effective service to your clients.
Thank you, Himanshu. Okay, so another question I have here is, as SharePoint and other services become more of the norm, what are the recommended methods of providing a continuity solution with Datto?
Okay, that's a great question. As you've pointed out there, Chad, what's happening is more and more services are moving from sort of on-premise, as we all knew it back in the day, to SaaS applications in a lot of cases, rather than just moving the workload to the cloud. So SharePoint's a great example of this, as is Exchange. And that is where Datto SaaS protection comes in. Datto made an acquisition of a company for this exact reason that you pointed out there, a company called Backupify. And what that allows us to do is to protect workloads in sort of large-scale SaaS applications, Office 365 being one of them. And what that allows us to do is to protect your customer data, which is in Exchange Online, OneDrive for Business, or SharePoint, which again means that if something happens, if one of those sites gets infected or some data gets accidentally deleted or compromised, we're able to restore that data directly back into the SharePoint site. So as more and more workload starts to move from sort of server-based infrastructure to a SaaS-based infrastructure, then that's where Datto SaaS protection comes in as a solution.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. And I have a question here for Himanshu. Is MFA included in the WatchGuard Total Security Suite?
Yeah, that's a great question again. So our multi-factor authentication is a standalone service, and that's for multiple reasons. What we've done is, I think it's almost 1 year anniversary of the service. So we launched multi-factor authentication as a standalone cloud service that is available, which can be used with either existing, WatchGuard infrastructure that partners might have, works very well with that, or with any other gateway solutions or resources that partners might have. So there's a couple of reasons for this being standalone. One, it allows for partners to have track of user-based licensing, which is what this service is based on. Secondly, it's a true cloud service. which means it can be leveraged from WatchGuard as a cloud service and then offered as a service by partners to their customers. And then the broad ecosystem of the service allows for integration with local access, for example, to your laptops and computers or virtual desktop infrastructures as well, and then into cloud applications where it's any of the SaaS applications, by lieu of either leveraging single sign-on based access or individual cloud applications. And then finally, remote access VPN, as I highlighted, remote users is a very common use case. So remote access VPN as well, and that's where it can be used either with WatchGuard's, remote access or any other remote access provider. So it's a standalone standalone service that can be leveraged and integrates with any one of these technology providers.
Great, thank you, Himanshu. And I have a question here is, what are some best practices that we can provide to our clients in regard to smartphone, bring your own device usage? For example, MFA helps authenticate their credentials, but what about other personal services they use on their phone like Gmail or iTunes, et cetera?
So I can take a stab at that, and I'll let Chris address that from business continuity standpoint as well. So I think most importantly, BYOD is something where you want to allow users to bring in any devices that they're using, personal, etc., into an IT infrastructure. So the number one thing is to segment your IT infrastructure where you are making sure that that network is traversed properly. The security services that you're implementing for guest networks versus enterprise applications is properly separated and segmented so that if you do have any compromises or threats in one, they don't proliferate across the other. The second is if the users are relying on some of these applications, use MFA, multi-factor authentication, to log into these applications. And then finally, some of our security services now are geared towards traveling with the user and working with some of these cloud applications. So not necessarily personal applications, but protecting, for example, access to some of these resources from whether corporate devices or some of these personal devices. And finally, if we don't have that in our portfolio, rely on mobile device management solutions, which can actually properly manage some of these mobile devices and the access to the resources from these devices as well.
Yeah, I was about just to add to that final point. I was just about to mention. I think that it's a difficult. This is going to be challenging. Obviously, multi-factor authentication is going to help. However, mobile device management or some system to allow sort of enforcement of application policy on devices is probably going to become more prevalent. My personal feeling, and I could be completely wrong with this, but my personal feeling that is until this problem's solved in maybe allowing organizations to sandbox corporate applications away from private applications, is that until this is solved, I think we may see that corporate applications on personal devices will start to reduce, and I think that we may start to see that employees maybe end up carrying two phones. I guess that's a simple way of doing it, but they'll probably have something for the personal applications, but then that will be kept separate from their corporate applications. I know in the past several companies across history have tried and failed mainly to try and create mobile phones to allow you to sandbox this, but I think that currently I'm not aware of a solution, so I think that it's mobile device management as a minimum. Two-factor authentication is a given, and I think that maybe if you're really sensitive about the data that your customers got, maybe you should be saying that those corporate email and private email applications don't coexist on the same machine.
Perfect. Thank you both. I have another question here. How can partners make sure that the backup and restore services being used are not backing up potential ransomware and malware hidden in the data?
Great question again. So do you want me to take that one first?
Yeah, Chris, take a stab at it, and I'd love to add to that as well.
Okay, yeah. Well, one of the things that that Datto is able to do is every backup that we take, we scan for ransomware, and then we'll flag that up directly into the Datto portal and also via email. And if you're running a PSA, whether that be Autotask PSA or ConnectWise Manage, we will send a ticket to say that this backup is suspected to have ransomware in it. And it'll be the same when you're restoring. If you want to restore a server or virtualize a server physically in a sandbox, you will get a warning if any ransomware has been detected in that server. So, and the way that Datto chain works in terms of the backup chain is there's no way that ransomware can infect previous versions. It's not possible for it to kind of go back through the network and infect the rest of the chain. So you certainly get a warning to say that this backup contains ransomware, and then it's a kind of a flag for you to do something about it as the MSP.
Thanks, Chris. I just want to add to that that this ties in very well into the layered security approach, that I highlighted earlier. Security services that WatchGuard offers, for example, the total security suite. I think the whole idea there is that whatever the entry points are for any ransomware or advanced malware to come in, ensuring that it's fully protected. So whether it's users' endpoints that they're carrying along with them, either within the enterprise or traveling with them, we have some advanced security services like threat detection and response that relies on basically resides on the endpoint, as well as talks to our cloud sandboxing, which prevents zero-day threats, as well as threat intelligence, which is a threat sync service. And the whole idea there is to be able to prevent using heuristics as well as machine learning and artificial intelligence to prevent any advanced malware to get to the user, and then most importantly detect that malware and ransomware as well. Then we allow some automated response actions where before that malware or ransomware is able to take any actions, we can restore or remediate that to its original state. So this is all part of our total security suite, which is available both on the network as well as on the endpoint. And then what that does is that it creates this clean baseline for the data to be then available for business continuity and for future use, and hence some of the other security services which are already built in solutions like Datto service add that additional layer of protection as well.
Thank you both. Okay, so it looks like we have time for one more question here. Let's see here. What can MSPs do to help protect their clients from phishing attacks? I know you talked about this a little bit, but maybe we can go into more detail.
Sure, I can take that, and I'll let Chris highlight that as well. So again, number one use case there is to provide solutions that can prevent some of these or detect some of these malicious URLs and detect these phishing attacks to even happen. So DNS Watch, which is one of the common services, which is where URLs are resolved using the DNS service, is something that WatchGuard offers and provides both on the network as well as on the endpoint. And that allows users to be protected from such phishing and spear phishing attacks. Also, it's tied in with an education element, so the user doesn't get an ugly error message and he picks up the phone and calls the partner, but instead it's tied in with the phishing education service that allows the user to know that what really happened and why it happened. So that's one way of preventing or protecting users against some of these phishing attacks.
Yeah, and from my point of view, I would agree with absolutely everything you've just said, but I'd say the single biggest thing that we can do as service providers or as MSPs is training. It's educating users. It's running things with sort of fake phishing campaigns or training sessions or seminars or workshops or however you want to do it. It's going through and just explaining to customers that these are the risks. Social engineering is a big thing, talking to the users about reusing passwords, talking to them about not sharing things on Facebook or LinkedIn that could be used to help with these phishing attacks, talk to them about not sharing too much information in out-of-office emails, all the kind of basic stuff that you as MSPs know, but these end users generally don't. And I think this is why we've all got a great opportunity as MSPs in the industry. We've seen the threats. We've seen this is real. We've seen there's all kinds of different things going off that's trying to get at customers' data, trying to lock the machines, trying to do all kinds of bad things with it. End users themselves, they don't have the skills, the expertise, the time, the knowledge, nothing to do this. MSPs do. And I think that in the past, whereas MSPs were kind of focused on maybe helping get printers working, this kind of thing, I think the next role for MSPs is all around education and helping security awareness. So if you're not already speaking to your clients around sort of security and pushing security as a really sort of key product and service, then I would really recommend that you do, because it's quite a frightening world out there in terms of cybersecurity, and you really, really have got a great opportunity to help your clients stay safe.
Great. Thank you, Himanshu and Chris. So thank you guys so much for all your time, including the attendees here today, and thank you to the presenters for your time as well. So just a heads up, you can download this presentation off of the resource list that you have on your interface on the webinar, and also you can watch the recording with the same link you used to enter here. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and end it here, but thank you so much everyone for your time again, and we'll see you on our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.